I found out my fiancé proposed with his ex-wife's ring. When she confronted me at our rehearsal, I finally realized just how bad he really was. Every head turned as the church doors swung open, and in the doorway stood a woman with the same piercing blue eyes as the diamond on my finger. The second I saw her, I knew exactly who she was. "Excuse me," she said. "I need to speak with the bride." Everyone in the wedding party turned to stare. My fiancé Derek went completely stunned. The woman walked down the aisle in jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt. She looked exhausted, like she'd been driving for hours to get here. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's my engagement ring," she said, pointing at my left hand. He never gave it back. The church went silent except for the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Derek's best man cleared his throat awkwardly. "I think there's been some mistake," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. The ring suddenly felt heavy on my finger. The woman reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "I have photos of me wearing that exact ring. Same inscription inside the band." She showed me the screen. There she was in a white dress, holding up her left hand to the camera. The ring was identical down to the tiny chip in the diamond I'd thought made mine uniquely special. Derek finally found his voice. "Jessica, what are you doing here?" So this was Jessica. The ex-wife he claimed had been completely unreasonable during their divorce proceedings 2 years ago. "Getting my grandmother's ring back," she said, her voice steady, but trembling slightly. "The one you promised to return 2 years ago." The inscription. I'd never bothered to look inside the band, but now I twisted the ring around my finger until I could see the tiny engraved words. J&D forever, not my initial, hers. My legs felt shaky. I sat down hard in the nearest pew, staring at the ring like it might suddenly transform into something else. "Derek, is this true?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. He ran his hands through his hair, messing up the perfect style his groomsmen had spent an hour perfecting with pomade and hairspray. "I can explain," he said, but his voice cracked on the words. "When we got divorced, you said you'd lost it," Jessica continued, her hands shaking as she held her phone. "But my cousin saw your engagement announcement on Facebook 3 months ago. She recognized the ring immediately and called me." I looked around the church at the faces of our wedding party. My bridesmaids stood frozen by the altar, their carefully arranged bouquets hanging limply at their sides. My maid of honor, Emily, stepped forward. "Maybe we should take this somewhere private." "No," I said, surprising myself with how firm my voice sounded despite the tremor in my hands. "I want to hear this right here, right now." Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Lily, please, let me explain everything later. After we what? Get married?" My voice was getting louder, echoing off the stone walls. "Explain what? That you proposed to me with another woman's ring?" Jessica pulled out a manila envelope from her oversized purse. "I brought the original receipt and some family photos. My grandmother bought this ring in 1952 when my grandfather proposed. It's been in my family for 3 generations." She handed me a yellowed piece of paper with faded blue ink. The date was from 71 years ago, the description matching my ring perfectly. 1 platinum solitaire engagement ring, 1 carat diamond, Art Deco setting. "This is the only thing I have left of her," Jessica said softly, her voice breaking. "She died when I was 16, and she left this ring to me specifically in her will." I started pulling the ring off my finger. It stuck a little at the knuckle, like it didn't want to let go after 8 months of believing it belonged to me. "Lily, stop," Derek said, reaching for my hand. "We can work this out. We can figure something else out." I jerked away from him, my skin crawling where he'd touched me. "Work what out? You stole your ex-wife's family heirloom and gave it to me like it was yours to give." The ring came free with a small pop. I held it out to Jessica, who took it with shaking hands and immediately slipped it onto her own finger. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You have no idea what this means to me. I thought it was gone forever." Derek was pacing now, his expensive dress shoes clicking frantically on the marble floor. "This is insane. The ring is mine. I paid for the wedding. I paid for everything during our marriage." "With what money?" Jessica shot back, her voice stronger now that she had her ring back. "You were unemployed for 6 months when we got married. You moved into my apartment, drove my car. My grandmother gave me this ring when I turned 18, years before I even met you. I felt like I was watching this happen to someone else. Like I was floating above the church, looking down at this complete disaster unfolding in real time." "How long have you been planning to get it back?" I asked Jessica, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "I hired a lawyer 6 months ago when Derek stopped responding to my emails and letters. But when I saw the engagement photos on social media, I knew I had to try talking to you first. Woman to woman. 6 months. Derek had proposed to me 8 months ago on a beach in Santa Monica, which meant Jessica had been looking for this ring since before we'd even started planning our wedding. You've been trying to contact him about this since before he even proposed to me." Jessica nodded, wiping her nose with a tissue from her purse. "I sent him letters, emails, even tried calling his work. He blocked my number and had his assistant tell me he'd moved and left no forwarding address. My wedding was supposed to start in 18 hours. 200 guests had flown in from across the country. The reception hall was decorated with white roses and fairy lights. The photographer had already been paid half her fee. I need some air," I said, walking toward the church exit on unsteady legs. Emily followed me outside into the parking lot. "Lily, wait, just breathe for a second." The late afternoon sun was bright after the dim church interior. Cars belonging to wedding party members who'd come early for rehearsal filled the lot. Derek's BMW was parked right next to my Honda, like a symbol of how intertwined our lives had become. "This explains so much," I said, more to myself than to Emily. Pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known existed suddenly clicking into place. "What do you mean?" I thought about all the times Derek had been evasive about the ring, how he'd gotten genuinely angry when I'd suggested having it appraised for our homeowner's insurance policy. He never wanted me to take it to a jeweler. Every time I mentioned getting it sized or cleaned, he'd change the subject or say it would be too expensive to insure properly. Emily pulled a pack of cigarettes from her clutch purse. She'd quit smoking 3 years ago after her father's lung cancer diagnosis, but apparently this qualified as a 5-alarm emergency. "What are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer. My phone was buzzing constantly with texts from family members asking about rehearsal dinner details, parking instructions, and whether they should wear jackets to the ceremony tomorrow. Derek came outside 20 minutes later, after Jessica had gotten back in her car and driven away. His tie was loosened and his hair looked like he'd been pulling at it. "We need to talk," he said, his cologne mixing with the smell of cigarette smoke from Emily's emergency smoke break. I was sitting on the church steps, still in my navy rehearsal dress but with my heels kicked off beside me on the concrete. "I'm listening. It's not what you think. I was going to tell you eventually." "When? After we were married? After our first anniversary? When exactly were you planning to mention that my engagement ring belongs to your ex-wife?" Derek sat down next to me, careful not to wrinkle his expensive tuxedo. "I bought you a new ring. It's at home in my sock drawer, in the back behind my gym socks." This was news to me. In 8 months of living together, I'd never seen another engagement ring. "What?" "I ordered a replacement 2 months ago from the same jeweler who made Jessica's grandmother's ring originally. I was going to switch them out before the wedding so she could have the original back." I stared at him, my brain struggling to process what he was telling me. So you were planning to give Jessica back a fake? No, the new one is exactly the same style, same setting, same everything. She would never have known the difference. It's not like she looks at jewelry catalogs for fun. The casual way he said it made my stomach turn. Like Jessica's feelings didn't matter at all. Like her grandmother's memory was just an inconvenience to be managed. Derek, that ring belonged to her grandmother. It's irreplaceable. It has sentimental value that has nothing to do with how much it cost or what it looks like. It's just jewelry, Lily. A chunk of metal and carbon. It doesn't change how I feel about you or how much I love you. I looked at my bare ring finger. The skin was pale where the band had been for 8 months, leaving a ghostly reminder of the lie I'd been wearing. If it's just jewelry, why didn't you buy me my own ring from the beginning? Why go through this elaborate deception? Derek was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I couldn't afford what you deserved. You grew up with nice things. Your parents have money. I wanted to give you something beautiful, something worthy of you. So you stole it. I didn't steal it. It was part of our marital assets when we divorced. My lawyer said I was entitled to half of everything. I pulled out my phone and Googled family heirloom divorce law, while Derek watched nervously. The results made his legal situation crystal clear. Actually, gifts from family members received before marriage usually stay with the original recipient. I read from the screen, especially items with sentimental value like jewelry passed down through generations. Derek's face fell as I continued reading. It says here that inherited items are typically considered separate property unless they were explicitly gifted to both spouses. You're taking her side? I'm taking the side of basic honesty and human decency, something you apparently don't understand. Emily was on her 3rd cigarette watching us from across the parking lot. She gave me a subtle thumbs up when she saw me looking, and I felt grateful to have at least one person in my corner. What do you want me to do, Lily? Cancel our entire wedding over a ring? Disappoint 200 people? Lose all our deposits? Throw away 2 years together? The casualness in his voice hit me like a physical slap, like this was all just a minor inconvenience instead of a fundamental betrayal of trust that had been going on for months. You lied to me for 8 months about something I wear every single day, something I look at dozens of times a day and think about our future together. I was protecting you from unnecessary drama with my crazy ex-wife. I stood up, brushing invisible dust off my dress. No, you were protecting yourself from the consequences of your choices. And don't call her crazy. She seems like the most reasonable person in this entire situation. Derek reached for my hand again, but I stepped out of his reach. Come on, let's go to dinner. We can figure this out tomorrow after we've both had time to cool down. The rehearsal dinner. I'd completely forgotten that 40 people were expecting us at Maggiano's in an hour for antipasti and champagne toasts. I can't sit through dinner pretending everything is fine. I can't smile and accept congratulations for a marriage that's built on lies. So what? You're going to ruin our entire wedding over this? Make me look like a fool in front of everyone we know? The way he phrased it made something click in my brain. Like I was the one ruining things, not him. Like his deception was somehow my fault for discovering it. I'm going home, I said, picking up my heels. I need to think about whether I can marry someone who lies to me this easily about something this important. I drove to my apartment in a complete daze, muscle memory navigating the familiar streets while my brain tried to process what had just happened. The wedding dress hanging in my closet looked like a ghost when I walked into my bedroom. My phone was ringing constantly. Derek calling every 10 minutes. My mom wanting to know why I wasn't at the restaurant. My sister asking if she should still fly in tomorrow morning. I turned it off and sat on my couch still wearing my rehearsal dress, trying to make sense of the last 2 hours. 8 months ago, Derek had gotten down on one knee in our favorite Italian restaurant and given me a ring that belonged to another woman. A ring with another woman's initial engraved inside the band. Every time I'd looked at it, every time someone had complimented it, every time I'd taken photos for Instagram or shown it off to coworkers, I'd been wearing a lie. I thought about Jessica's face when she'd seen the ring on my finger, the relief in her eyes when I'd given it back. How long had she been scrolling through Derek's social media, seeing her grandmother's ring on another woman's hand? My laptop was on the coffee table. I opened it and went to Derek's Facebook page, something I rarely did since we lived together, and I saw him every day. The engagement announcement was still pinned to the top of his timeline. Derek and me smiling at the camera in the restaurant, my left hand prominently displayed with the ring catching the candlelight. I scrolled down through his photos, looking for pictures from his first marriage. It took me 20 minutes to find them, buried deep in his timeline from 4 years ago. There was Jessica in a white dress at what looked like a beach wedding, holding up her left hand to show off the ring, the same proud smile I'd had in my own engagement photos. I screenshot everything, though I wasn't sure why. It felt important to document this, to have proof that I wasn't going crazy. There were dozens of photos from their wedding and honeymoon. Jessica looked genuinely happy, radiant even. Nothing like the unstable woman Derek had described to me. In one photo, Jessica was showing the ring to what looked like an elderly woman in a hospital bed. The caption read, "Grandma Rose got to see her ring at my wedding. She passed away 2 weeks later, but I'm so glad she was there." My throat tightened reading that. Jessica's grandmother had seen her granddaughter get married wearing the family ring, probably thinking it would stay in the family for another generation. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Where are you? Everyone's asking about dinner. Derek looks like he's going to throw up." I typed back, "Not coming. Can you handle the explanations?" "Of course. Are you okay? Do you want me to come over?" I wasn't okay. I wasn't even close to okay. But I didn't know how to explain that in a text message. "Need to be alone right now. We'll call you later." I changed out of my dress and into sweatpants and Derek's old college t-shirt, then immediately took it off because it smelled like his cologne and made me feel sick. The wedding was in 16 hours, and I had no idea what I was going to do. Part of me wanted to go through with it anyway, to avoid the embarrassment and financial loss, but a bigger part of me couldn't imagine saying vows to someone who'd spent months lying to my face. I tried to think of other times Derek had been deceptive, and once I started looking, the examples were everywhere. Little things I'd brushed off or made excuses for, like the time he said he'd been at work late, but when I drove by his office to surprise him with dinner, his car wasn't in the parking lot. When I asked him about it, he said he'd had to move his car to the street because of construction. Or the time he told me he'd paid the electric bill, but then we got a shut-off notice 3 days later. He said there must have been a banking error that he'd call and sort it out. Or the countless times he'd claimed to have called me back when my phone showed no missed calls. "Must be your phone acting up," he'd say with a shrug. I'd always given him the benefit of the doubt because I loved him and wanted our relationship to work. But now I was seeing a pattern of someone who lied reflexively, almost casually, whenever the truth was inconvenient. Derek showed up at my door at 11 p.m. I could hear him in the hallway, trying different combinations on my building's security lock that he'd seen me use dozens of times. "Lily, I know you're up there. Your car is in the parking lot and your lights are on." I didn't answer. I was curled up on my couch watching Netflix with a pint of ice cream, trying to pretend this was a normal Friday night before a normal Saturday wedding. I brought the new ring, the one I bought for you. I want you to see it. That got my attention despite myself. I walked to the window and looked down at the parking lot. Derek was standing by the building entrance, holding up a small blue jewelry box. Against my better judgment, I buzzed him in. He looked terrible when I opened my door. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled and partially untucked, his eyes red and puffy like he'd been crying in his car. "I'm sorry," he said before I could say anything. "I should have told you about the ring from the very beginning. I should have been honest." I let him in but didn't sit down, keeping the coffee table between us like a physical barrier. "Show me the new one." Derek opened the jewelry box with shaking hands. Inside was a ring that looked almost identical to Jessica's grandmother's ring, but when I looked closer, the diamond was slightly smaller, and the setting was subtly different. "When did you buy this?" 2 months ago, right after you mentioned wanting to get the ring appraised for insurance. I realized I was going to get caught eventually, so I ordered this as a replacement. So he'd been planning this deception for months, not just trying to figure out how to fix a mistake. The thought made me feel physically sick. "Were you ever going to tell me the truth? About any of it?" Derek set the box down on my coffee table like it was evidence in a trial. I hoped I wouldn't have to. I thought Jessica would just let it go eventually, move on with her life. Let it go? It's her grandmother's ring, Derek. It's probably the most important piece of jewelry she owns. It's been 4 years since our divorce. She should have gotten over it by now instead of stalking my social media and tracking me down. I sat down across from him, meeting the distance. "This isn't about getting over anything. This is about you taking something that didn't belong to you and then lying about it for years. The ring was in our house when we separated. I lived there too. I had just as much right to it as she did. But it wasn't yours, Derek. It was a family heirloom that she brought into the marriage. It has nothing to do with shared assets or community property." Derek leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, looking like a man trying to sell me something I didn't want to buy. "I wanted to give you something special, something that showed how much I love you and want to spend my life with you. By lying to me for 8 months? By giving you a beautiful ring with a romantic story. The actual history behind it doesn't matter as much as what it represents for us, but it did matter. It mattered that every time I'd looked at my ring, I'd been thinking about our future together, while he'd been thinking about his past and how to cover up his mistakes. What else have you lied about?" Derek's face went pale, and for a moment I thought he might actually tell me something else. "Nothing. This is the only thing, I swear." "How do I know that? How do I know anything you've told me is true?" We sat in silence for a few minutes. I could hear my upstairs neighbor walking around, probably getting ready for bed like a normal person whose life wasn't imploding 12 hours before their wedding. "What do you want me to do?" Derek asked finally, his voice small and defeated. "I want you to leave. I need to think about whether I can marry someone who lies to me this easily about something this important. Lily, please, don't let one mistake ruin everything we've built together. We have a good life. We love each other. We're perfect for each other." But as he said it, I realized this wasn't just one mistake. This was a pattern I'd been ignoring for months, maybe years. "Remember when you told me Jessica was crazy during your divorce? That she'd made unreasonable demands and tried to take things that weren't hers?" Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "She did make unreasonable demands." "Like what? Asking for her grandmother's ring back?" "She wanted half of everything, even things that were clearly mine. But the ring wasn't clearly yours. It was clearly hers. You've been calling her crazy and vindictive for wanting back something you stole." Derek stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over the coffee table. "I didn't steal anything. Everything in that house was fair game during the divorce. Then why didn't you list the ring in the divorce paperwork? Why did you tell her you'd lost it instead of claiming it as part of your assets?" He didn't have an answer for that, and I could see him trying to come up with another lie, another excuse that would make this all go away. "I think you should go," I said, standing up as well. "I need time to think. What about tomorrow? What about our wedding? What about all the people who are expecting to celebrate with us?" I looked at the clock on my phone. It was 11:47 p.m. In 12 hours and 13 minutes, I was supposed to walk down the aisle to marry this man who'd been lying to my face for 8 months. "I don't know." Derek picked up the jewelry box with the new ring, holding it like a peace offering. "Can I at least leave this here, in case you change your mind?" I nodded, though I couldn't imagine putting on another engagement ring from him, not after everything that had happened tonight. After he left, I called Emily even though it was almost midnight. She answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting for my call. "How was dinner?" I asked, needing to hear about something normal and predictable. Awkward as hell. Derek kept checking his phone every 5 minutes and barely touched his food. "Your mom asked me 3 times if you were really okay, and I could tell she didn't believe the food poisoning story." "What did you tell everyone? That you had a stomach bug and would hopefully be better by tomorrow?" "But Lily, people are starting to ask questions. Your dad looked really worried." I laughed despite everything. A slightly hysterical sound. "Food poisoning? That's actually pretty creative. Are you going to go through with it? The wedding?" I looked at the jewelry box Derek had left on my coffee table, sitting there like a symbol of everything wrong with our relationship. "I have no idea. What does your gut tell you?" My gut told me that marrying Derek would be the biggest mistake of my life, but my gut had also told me he was perfect for me for the past 2 years, so I wasn't sure I trusted it anymore. I'm not sure I trust my gut anymore. It's been wrong about Derek for 2 years straight. Emily was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her moving around her apartment, probably getting ready for bed. Maybe your gut was trying to tell you something all along, but you weren't ready to listen. That hit me harder than I expected. How many times had I felt uneasy about Derek's explanations but talked myself out of questioning them? "Do you want me to come over? I can be there in 20 minutes. "No, I need to figure this out on my own. But thank you for covering for me tonight." "Of course, that's what best friends are for." After we hung up, I tried to imagine walking down the aisle tomorrow, saying vows to someone who'd spent 8 months lying to my face about something I wore every single day. But I also thought about the deposits we'd lose, the guests who traveled from out of state, the embarrassment of canceling everything at the last minute. The caterer alone had cost $8,000, and the venue required full payment regardless of whether we showed up. My parents had already paid for the flowers, the photographer, the band. My phone rang at 1 a.m. The caller ID said Jessica Chen, and I realized Derek must have given her my number at some point, or she'd gotten it from the church directory. "I'm sorry to call so late," she said when I answered. "I couldn't sleep, and I wanted to make sure you were okay after everything that happened today." "I'm not okay, but I'm not sure anyone would be in this situation. I also wanted you to know that I don't blame you for any of this." Derek can be very convincing when he wants something. Very charming. I fell for it too. That was an understatement. Derek had convinced me he was honest and trustworthy for 2 entire years. "Can I ask you something personal?" I said. "Was he like this when you were married? The lying about small things?" Jessica sighed, and I could hear the weight of old pain in the sound. "It started small, little things that didn't seem important at the time, but it got worse over the years." "What kind of things?" "He'd tell me he was working late, but I'd run into to his coworkers at the grocery store and they'd mention he'd left early. He'd say he'd paid bills that were still overdue when I checked our accounts. He'd claim he'd called to RSVP for things, but then we'd show up and they'd have no record of it. This sounded painfully familiar. Derek had a habit of stretching the truth about things that seemed minor, and I'd always assumed he was just trying to avoid conflict or had genuinely forgotten. Is that why you got divorced? Partly, but mostly because I realized I couldn't trust anything he said anymore. It's exhausting, living with someone you can't believe. You start second-guessing everything, even your own memories. After Jessica hung up, I sat in the dark thinking about trust and how long it takes to build versus how quickly it can be destroyed. I thought about all the times Derek had been stuck in traffic, when he was probably just running late and didn't want to admit it. All the times he'd claimed to have called me back when my phone showed no missed calls. Little lies that I'd overlooked because I loved him and wanted our relationship to work. But now they felt like red flags I'd been ignoring for months. At 3 a.m., I called my mom even though I knew she'd be asleep. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice groggy but immediately alert when she heard it was me. Lily, what's wrong? Are you sick? Should I come over? Mom, what would you do if Dad had proposed to you with another woman's ring? There was a long pause and I could hear her sitting up in bed, probably nudging my father awake. Honey, what's going on? Why aren't you getting your beauty sleep before the big day? I told her everything that had happened at the church. The ring, Jessica's appearance, Derek's lies, the pattern of deception I was finally seeing clearly. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of shock or sympathy. Oh, sweetheart, she said when I finished. I'm so sorry this happened to you, especially the night before your wedding. What do I do, Mom? Everyone's expecting a wedding tomorrow. We've spent so much money. People have traveled from across the country. What does your heart tell you to do? My heart was broken. My heart was confused and angry and hurt. My heart didn't know anything anymore. I don't know if I can marry him. I don't know if I can trust him ever again. Then don't marry him. But the wedding, the money, all the people who are expecting to celebrate with us. Honey, all of that is just one day and some money. You're talking about the rest of your life. Don't marry someone just because it's easier than canceling. She was right, but that didn't make the decision any easier. The thought of facing 200 people tomorrow and explaining why there was no wedding made me feel sick. I'll support whatever you decide, Mom continued. But don't sacrifice your happiness and peace of mind to avoid some temporary embarrassment. I hung up feeling slightly more clear-headed but still completely torn. I tried to imagine my life without Derek, and it was terrifying. We'd been together for 2 years. We had shared friends, shared routines, shared dreams for the future. But I also tried to imagine being married to someone I couldn't trust. Someone who lied so easily about things that mattered. Someone who would steal his ex-wife's family heirloom and then call her crazy for wanting it back. At 6 a.m., I made my decision. I called Derek first, knowing he probably hadn't slept either. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting by his phone all night. Lily, are you okay? I've been so worried. I can't do this, I said without preamble. I can't marry you. What? Lily, please, we can work through this. People make mistakes. I'll never lie to you again, I promise. You swore to love and honor me when you proposed 8 months ago, but you were lying then too. That's not fair. I do love you. I love you more than anything. Derek was crying now. I could hear it in his voice. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to take back what I'd said and pretend everything could go back to normal. I know you love me, I said, but love isn't enough if there's no trust, and I'll never be able to trust you again. Please don't do this. Think about everything we've planned, everything we've built together. Don't throw it all away over one mistake. It's not one mistake, Derek. It's a pattern. It's 8 months of lying about something I look at every single day. It's calling your ex-wife crazy for wanting back something you stole from her. I hung up before he could argue anymore, before I could let him talk me out of the first clear decision I'd made in months. Then I called Emily. The wedding's off. Can you help me make some phone calls? The next 6 hours were a blur of canceled vendors, disappointed relatives, and awkward explanations. Emily came over with coffee and donuts and handled most of the phone calls while I sat on my couch in my pajamas, eating sugar and trying not to think about the wedding dress hanging in my closet. The hardest calls were to my family members who'd flown in for the wedding. My grandmother had come all the way from Florida, and she cried when I told her what had happened. That boy never deserved you anyway, she said through her tears. I had a feeling about him at Thanksgiving. Something in his eyes didn't sit right with me. My uncle was less sympathetic. You're really going to cancel your entire wedding over a ring? Marriage is about compromise, Lily. You can't expect perfection. But this wasn't about perfection. This was about basic honesty and respect. The caterer was surprisingly understanding when Emily explained the situation. They couldn't refund our deposit, but they offered to donate the food to a local homeless shelter instead of letting it go to waste. The venue was less flexible, keeping both our deposit and the full rental fee since we were canceling with less than 24 hours notice. By noon it was done. No wedding, no husband, no ring, no happily ever after. I felt empty and relieved at the same time, like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. Derek showed up at my door one last time that evening, just as the sun was setting on what should have been our wedding day. He looked broken, like he hadn't slept or eaten or showered since our conversation that morning. His hair was greasy, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes red and swollen. I brought your stuff from my place, he said, holding up a cardboard box, and I wanted to return your key. Inside the box were my toothbrush, some clothes I'd left at his apartment, a few books, and the coffee mug I'd bought on our trip to Portland last year. It wasn't much, considering we'd been planning to merge our entire lives. I also brought this, he said, pulling out the jewelry box with the replacement ring. I want you to have it anyway, even if you never wear it. Derek, I can't take that. It wouldn't be right. Please. Even if you hate me, even if you never want to see me again, I want you to know that I was trying to do the right thing eventually. I took the box but didn't open it. Couldn't bear to look at another engagement ring that represented nothing but lies and manipulation. The right thing would have been buying me my own ring from the beginning, or at the very least telling me the truth when you decided to propose. I know that now. I know I messed up everything good in my life. He stood on my doorstep for a few more minutes, like he was hoping I'd change my mind and invite him in, but I didn't. I hope you find someone who deserves you, he said finally. I hope you learn to be honest with the next person you claim to love. After he left, I put the jewelry box in my kitchen junk drawer without opening it. I didn't want to see another engagement ring for a very long time. The next few weeks were brutal. I had to explain to everyone why the wedding was canceled, and people's reactions ranged from sympathetic to judgmental. Some people understood immediately. If he could lie about that, what else would he lie about? My coworker Amanda said when I told her the story. Others acted like I'd overreacted. It's just a ring, my cousin said when she called to check on me. All marriages require compromise and forgiveness. But it wasn't just a ring. It was the principle behind it. It was 8 months of systematic deception about something that was supposed to represent our love and commitment. Emily was my lifeline during those dark weeks. She brought me groceries when I was too depressed to leave my apartment, listened to me cry about the same things over and over, and never once made me feel like I'd made the wrong decision. You saved yourself from a lifetime of questioning your own reality, she told me one particularly bad day when I was second-guessing everything. Trust is the foundation of any relationship. Without it, you have nothing. The worst part was the isolation. Derek and I had shared most of our friends, and after the breakup, several of them stopped calling me altogether. Either they believed his version of events, or they simply didn't want to deal with the drama. Marcus, Derek's best friend and former groomsman, actually had the nerve to call me 2 weeks after the canceled wedding. Derek's really messed up about this, he said. Like I was supposed to feel sorry for the man who'd lied to me for 8 months. He made one mistake. Don't you think you're being a little harsh? Would you be okay with your fiancé proposing to you with another man's ring? I asked him. That's different. How? Marcus couldn't answer that, and we haven't spoken since. But not everyone took Derek's side. My college roommate Jennifer called me after hearing about the cancellation through mutual friends. I always thought something was off about him, she said. Remember at your housewarming party when he told that story about his college roommate? I later met the guy at another party, and his version was completely different. I did remember that. Derek had painted himself as the victim in a roommate conflict, but when Jennifer mentioned it, I realized there had been several inconsistencies in his story that I'd brushed off at the time. I should have said something then, Jennifer continued, but you seemed so happy and I didn't want to cause problems. It made me wonder how many other people had noticed Derek's tendency to embellish or outright lie about things, but had stayed quiet to avoid drama. I also started paying more attention to the stories Derek had told me about his past relationships. He described every ex-girlfriend as crazy or clingy or unstable. Jessica was supposedly vindictive and money-hungry. His college girlfriend was allegedly stalking him years after they broke up. Now I wondered if those women had simply been asking for honesty and accountability, and Derek had rewritten history to make himself look like the victim. 2 months after the canceled wedding, I ran into Jessica at a coffee shop near my office. She was reading a book at a corner table, her grandmother's ring catching the light as she turned pages. Lily, she said when she saw me, genuinely pleased. How are you doing? I've been thinking about you. Better than I was, I said honestly. Mind if I sit for a minute? We talked for over an hour. Jessica told me more about her marriage to Derek, and the similarities to my own experience were startling. He was so charming when we were dating, she said. Attentive, romantic, everything I thought I wanted. But after we got married, the lies started getting bigger and more frequent. What was the final straw? I found out he'd been telling his family that I was the reason we couldn't afford a house, when actually he'd been hiding credit card debt from me for months. When I confronted him about it, he said I was being paranoid and controlling. This sounded achingly familiar. Derek had a way of turning arguments around, making you feel like you were the problem for asking questions or expecting honesty. He also used to go through my phone and social media, Jessica continued. He said he was just curious, but then he'd bring up things from months earlier in fights, like he was keeping a running tally of everything I did wrong. I thought about how Derek always seemed to know details about my conversations with friends or family, even when I hadn't shared them with him. He'd explain it away by saying I must have mentioned it and forgotten, and I believed him. I'm so glad you got out when you did, Jessica said. I wasted 4 years trying to make it work with him. She told me she was engaged again, to a man who sounded like Derek's complete opposite. The first time I questioned something he said, I was terrified he'd get angry, but he just explained the situation more clearly and thanked me for asking. I cried that night because I'd forgotten what it felt like to be with someone honest. Jessica and I became unlikely friends after that. She was the only person who truly understood what it was like to be on the receiving end of Derek's manipulation. She also gave me some practical advice about moving forward. Don't let him steal your ability to trust people, she said. Not everyone is like Derek. Most people are basically honest, even if they're not perfect. 3 months after calling off the wedding, my life took another dramatic turn when Jessica called me at work, her voice shaking with panic. Lily, Derek broke into my apartment last night. He's been arrested, but there's something you need to know. The police found things in his car that suggest this goes much deeper than we thought. I left work immediately and met Jessica at the police station. Detective Rodriguez showed us into a small conference room and spread out evidence photos on the table. We found multiple engagement rings in Derek's vehicle, he explained. 7 different rings, all in jewelry store boxes. We also found detailed files on numerous women, including both of you. My blood ran cold as I looked at the photos. One ring was the replacement Derek had tried to give me, but the others were completely different styles, clearly meant for other women. How many other victims are there? Jessica asked. We're still investigating, but we've identified at least 5 other women across 3 different states. The pattern is always the same. Derek presents himself as financially successful, proposes within 6 to 12 months, then begins asking for financial help with various emergencies. Detective Rodriguez showed us Derek's files, manila folders with our names on them, containing printed social media posts, financial information he'd somehow obtained, and handwritten notes about our personalities and vulnerabilities. Target, Lily Chen. Teacher, makes $58K annually. Parents have money. Recent breakup, seeking stability. Approach, marriage proposal, future planning. Target, Jessica Walsh. Marketing manager, $72K annually. Grandmother died recently. Emotionally vulnerable. Has family heirloom jewelry. Approach, sympathy, romantic gestures. Reading my own profile was nauseating. Derek had reduced me to a series of weaknesses to exploit and assets to extract. This isn't just casual dating that went wrong, Detective Rodriguez continued. Derek Walsh has been running a systematic romance scam operation for at least 4 years. Over the next few days, more victims came forward. Amy Morrison, a 24-year-old who'd given Derek $5,000 for his mother's cancer treatment. Rebecca Chen, who'd lost $12,000 to Derek's fake investment scheme. Emily Kim, whose family jewelry had mysteriously disappeared while Derek was living in her apartment. Each woman had the same story. Derek had seemed perfect at first, charming and attentive and ready for commitment. But gradually, he'd begun asking for money to help with temporary financial problems that never seemed to resolve. He told me his ex-wife was stalking him and he needed money for legal fees. Rebecca told us during a group meeting. I gave him $8,000 before I realized there was no lawyer, no legal fees, nothing. He convinced me to co-sign a car loan, added Maria Santos, a nurse who dated Derek between his relationships with Jessica and me. Said his credit was temporarily frozen due to identity theft. The car was repossessed 3 months later. The FBI got involved when they discovered Derek had been operating across state lines, using dating websites and social media to target women in different cities. Agent Emily Martinez briefed us on the scope of Derek's operation. "We've identified 17 victims so far," she said. "The total financial damage exceeds $200,000. But this case is significant for another reason. Derek's methods were extremely sophisticated. He studied each target for months before making contact, crafting a perfect persona to match what each woman was looking for. Derek had created multiple online identities, each with a carefully constructed backstory. To some women, he was a successful consultant. To others, he was an entrepreneur or a tech executive. He'd even used different photos in his dating profiles, though they were all actually him from different time periods and angles. He's not just a romance scammer," Agent Martinez explained. "He's more like a serial predator who uses emotional manipulation instead of physical force to control his victims." Derek's trial began 8 months later. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence: the detailed victim files, financial records showing the flow of money from his targets to his accounts, and testimony from 17 different women spanning 5 years. But Derek's defense strategy was as manipulative as his romantic cons. His lawyer painted him as a hopeless romantic who'd made poor financial decisions, claiming the women had willingly given him money because they loved him. "My client never forced anyone to give him money," his lawyer argued. "These women made voluntary choices to support someone they cared about. The fact that the relationships didn't work out doesn't make their generosity criminal." It was sickening to watch Derek sit in court, perfectly groomed in an expensive suit, nodding along as his lawyer portrayed us as vindictive ex-girlfriends trying to destroy him. When it was my turn to testify, I looked directly at Derek as I described the 8 months I'd worn his ex-wife's stolen ring, believing it represented our love and future together. "Derek Walsh is a predator," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "He studies women like prey animals, identifies their vulnerabilities, and manipulates their emotions for financial gain. He doesn't see us as human beings. We're just targets in his business plan." Derek's face remained impassive throughout my testimony, but I could see something flickering behind his eyes. Not remorse or shame, but calculation. Even sitting in a defendant's chair, he was still working the angles, still trying to figure out how to manipulate the situation to his advantage. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all federal charges of fraud, identity theft, and racketeering. Derek was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all 17 victims. The judge made it clear that Derek's lack of remorse was a factor in the lengthy sentence. "Mr. Walsh showed a complete disregard for the financial and emotional well-being of his victims," Judge Patricia Romano said during sentencing. "His systematic exploitation of vulnerable women represents a particularly cruel form of predatory behavior that cannot be tolerated." After the sentencing, all of Derek's victims gathered for dinner at a restaurant near the courthouse. It was strange bonding with women who'd all been manipulated by the same predator, but there was something cathartic about sharing our stories without shame or judgment. "I keep thinking about how close I came to marrying him," Amy said, raising her glass of wine. "If Jessica hadn't shown up at your rehearsal, I might have been his next wife. And I might never have gotten my grandmother's ring back," Jessica added. "Here's to Lily for having the courage to call off that wedding." But our relief was short-lived. Within weeks of Derek's imprisonment, strange things began happening to all of us. I started receiving anonymous messages on social media from accounts claiming Derek was innocent and had been framed by vindictive women. The messages contained personal details about my life that only Derek would know. Jessica found someone had been going through her trash and taking photos of her apartment building. Rebecca's car tires were slashed twice in her office parking lot. Agent Martinez called an emergency meeting to address what was happening. "Derek has been using his limited phone privileges to coordinate a harassment campaign against his victims," she explained. "He's recruited supporters online who believe his version of events and are now targeting all of you." Derek had somehow managed to publish a blog from prison, spinning his story as a cautionary tale about false accusations and vengeful ex-girlfriends. The blog gained a following among men's rights activists who saw Derek as a victim of systemic persecution. "These women conspired to destroy an innocent man," Derek had written. "They couldn't handle rejection, so they invented elaborate lies to get revenge. The real crime here is how easily our justice system can be manipulated by vindictive females." Despite being behind bars, Derek was still manipulating people, still finding ways to control and punish the women who'd exposed him. The harassment escalated when Derek's supporters doxed several of us, publishing our home addresses and workplace information online. I was forced to move apartments and change my phone number after receiving dozens of threatening calls. "He's more dangerous in prison than he was on the outside," Jessica observed during one of our group calls. "At least when he was free, he was only targeting one woman at a time. Now he's inspiring other predators to join his cause." But Derek made a crucial mistake that ultimately ended his influence campaign. He got too greedy. While orchestrating harassment against his victims, Derek had also been running a new romance scam from prison, using intermediaries to contact women on dating websites and solicit money for his legal defense fund. The FBI caught him when one of his accomplices was arrested with detailed instructions in Derek's handwriting, including scripts for phone calls and specific targets to approach. Derek's prison privileges were revoked, and he was transferred to a maximum security facility where his communications were heavily monitored. The harassment campaign against his victims finally stopped. 4 years after I should have married Derek Walsh, I met Marcus Chen at a bookstore where he was buying supplies for his high school biology class. "Excuse me," he said, reaching around me for a book on marine biology. "Sorry, I'm trying to make photosynthesis exciting for 15-year-olds. We started talking about books and teaching, and I found myself laughing for the first time in months. He had an easy sense of humor and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. When he asked for my number, I almost said no. The thought of trusting someone new felt overwhelming after everything with Derek. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course," he said, and something about the way he didn't pressure me made me reconsider. "Actually, yes, I'd like that." Our first few dates were casual and low pressure. Coffee, a bookstore browsing session, a walk through the park. We talked about our jobs, our families, our favorite movies. On our 4th date, something happened that made me realize how much I'd grown since Derek. Marcus was telling me about his day, and some of the details didn't quite line up. Nothing major, just a small inconsistency about timing that reminded me of Derek's constant stream of little lies. The old me would have ignored it, made excuses, avoided potential conflict at all costs. The new me spoke up immediately. "Wait," I said, interrupting his story. "You said you had lunch with your brother at noon, but you also said you were teaching 3rd period then. Your school has lunch at 11:30, doesn't it?" minute. Marcus paused for a second, then laughed. You're absolutely right. I'm terrible with times. I had lunch with him at 12:30 after my class ended. Sorry, I always mix up the schedule. It was such a small thing, but his immediate honesty and lack of defensiveness meant everything to me. No gaslighting, no making me feel crazy for asking a question, no elaborate explanation that raised more questions than it answered. Thank you for being straight with me, I said. Of course, why wouldn't I be? That's when I knew I was ready to trust someone again. Not because Marcus was perfect, but because he was honest about his imperfections. We've been together for 3 years now. He knows the whole story about Derek and the canceled wedding, and he's never made me feel damaged or paranoid because of it. You have good instincts, he tells me when I question something that doesn't feel right. Trust them. Marcus met my family at Thanksgiving, and my mom pulled me aside afterward to tell me how much she liked him. He looks at you the way your father looks at me, she said, like you're the most interesting person in the room. It's different from how Derek used to look at me. Derek's attention had felt possessive, like he was cataloging my reactions for future use. Marcus just seems genuinely happy to be around me. Last month, Marcus proposed, not with a stolen ring or elaborate lies, but with a simple, honest conversation about our future, and a ring he'd chosen specifically for me. I love you exactly as you are, he said, as he got down on one knee in our living room. I want to build a life with you based on trust and honesty and mutual respect. I said yes without hesitation, and this time I knew exactly what I was saying yes to. We're planning a small wedding for next fall, just family and close friends, focused on the commitment we're making rather than the production we can stage. The ring Marcus gave me is beautiful, but more importantly, it's mine. Chosen for me, bought for me, given to me with complete honesty about its history and meaning. Jessica will be my maid of honor, wearing her grandmother's ring as she stands beside me at the altar. Sometimes I think about the alternate timeline where I'd gone through with marrying Derek, where I'd spent years questioning my sanity, making excuses for his lies, slowly losing pieces of myself to keep the peace. It's a life I can barely imagine now, and I'm grateful every day that Jessica walked into that church when she did. She gave me back more than a stolen ring. She gave me back my ability to trust myself, to demand honesty, to build a relationship worth having. The wedding dress Derek and I picked out together is long gone, donated to a charity that gives dresses to women who can't afford them. I hope whoever wore it had the honest, loving wedding I'm planning to have. As for Derek, he's serving his 12-year sentence in federal prison. I heard through the victim advocate that he's been denied parole twice for failing to show remorse or take responsibility for his crimes. Some people change when they face consequences, others just find new people to lie to. But that's not my problem anymore. I learned to stop trying to save people from Derek, including Derek himself. Instead, I focus on the life I'm building with someone who chooses honesty even when it's difficult, who respects my questions instead of deflecting them, who sees my strength instead of trying to undermine it. I almost married a man who stole his ex-wife's ring and lied about it for 8 months. Instead, I'm marrying a man who tells me the truth even about small things, who bought me my own ring with a story I can be proud to tell. The difference has made all the difference.